Brittany Marlowe Holberg sits on Texas death row, a woman whose crime shocked a community and forever altered lives. Tonight, we'll take a closer look at the events that led her to await execution, the trial that sealed her fate, and the chilling reality of life under a death sentence in the Lone Star State. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss our deep dives into the most notorious cases on death row. It was a quiet evening in Texas, the kind where the streets seem almost sleepy, and the warm summer air carries the faint scent of barbecues and freshly cut grass. But in 1993, that ordinary calm was shattered in a way no one in Holberg's hometown would ever forget. Brittany Marlowe Holberg, a young woman with a troubled past and a complicated history, became the center of a crime so violent, so meticulously planned, it would leave the community reeling for years. People who lived nearby later described hearing noises that didn't quite fit the peaceful night. Shouts, a sudden crash, the hurried footsteps of someone fleeing in panic. The victim was a young man, full of promise, whose life was brutally cut short. Friends remembered him as someone who always had a smile, always tried to help people. That smile, that energy, vanished in the blink of an eye, leaving family, neighbors, and friends struggling to comprehend the loss. As investigators pieced together the events of that night, a chilling pattern emerged. This wasn't a spontaneous act of anger or a crime of opportunity. Every detail, every action suggested premeditation. Holberg had planned the attack in advance, carefully, deliberately, coldly. She had studied the victim's routines, knew when he would be alone, and took advantage of that knowledge in the dead of night. Neighbors who first arrived at the scene described a scene that seemed almost surreal. It was like stepping into a nightmare, one recalled. You could hear the sirens, and there was this awful stillness in the air. You just knew something terrible had happened. Crime scene photos, later released in court, painted a grim picture, an image of violence and calculation, not of chaos or confusion. Authorities were quick to label the act cold-blooded and calculated, a phrase that would be repeated in news reports and court proceedings for months to come. But amid the horror, the humanity of the victim remained painfully clear. His friends remembered little details, the way he laughed, the way he cared for his younger siblings, the dreams he had for his future. These memories clashed violently with the images of the crime, highlighting the senselessness of the act and the depth of the tragedy. As the investigation continued, more unsettling truths emerged about Holberg herself. People who knew her described her as distant, enigmatic, and at times unnervingly detached. She could charm you, and then there was this darkness, a former acquaintance recalled. It was a darkness that, on that fateful night, would have deadly consequences. By the time authorities gathered enough evidence to make an arrest, the story had already gripped the town and the nation. Headlines screamed about a young man whose life was stolen and a young woman whose crime would land her on the path to death row. But even as the shock began to settle, questions lingered. Why? How could someone plan such a thing? And what had driven Brittany Marlowe Holberg to cross that line from troubled youth to convicted killer? The answers, as the trial would later reveal, were as complex as they were disturbing. Hints of psychological turmoil, desperation, and a chilling capacity for violence that had remained hidden behind a seemingly ordinary exterior. And yet, the full horror of the crime didn't end with the act itself. It was just the beginning of a story that would unravel slowly, piece by piece, shocking everyone who followed it. The arrest came quickly, but not without tension. Police had been working tirelessly, combing through evidence, interviewing neighbors, and tracking Holberg's movements in the days following the incident. They knew that time was critical. The longer she remained free, the greater the fear in the community. When law enforcement finally approached her, it wasn't a chaotic chase or dramatic standoff. Instead, it was methodical, almost clinical. Officers surrounded her residence quietly in the early morning hours, ensuring no one would be harmed. Holberg emerged from the house with a calm demeanor that unsettled even seasoned detectives. "She didn't fight us, didn't resist," one officer later recounted. But there was this look like she already knew what was coming, like she was resigned to it. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Families of the victim filled the seats, gripping one another's hands, eyes wide with a mixture of grief, anger, and anticipation. Every detail mattered. The way the prosecution presented the timeline, the forensic evidence meticulously pieced together, and the testimonies from witnesses who had noticed Holberg acting suspiciously before and after the incident. The trial revealed more about Holberg than anyone outside her life had ever known. Prosecutors painted a portrait of someone who had carefully considered her actions, emphasizing that this was no spur-of-the-moment mistake. Each piece of evidence, from the notes investigators uncovered to the inconsistencies in her statements, reinforced the idea that this was deliberate. Witnesses testified about Holberg's behavior in the lead-up to the crime, a growing detachment from friends and family, unusual absences, and conversations that hinted at dark intentions. She seemed different, one neighbor said. Like she was planning something, but I didn't know it would be this. That chilling hindsight weighed heavily in the courtroom, as jurors tried to reconcile the person they saw in court with the violent actions she had carried out. The defense tried to humanize Holberg, presenting arguments about her troubled upbringing, the psychological challenges she faced, and moments of vulnerability in her past. They called on psychologists to testify, exploring the pressures and traumas that might have influenced her mindset. But the prosecution countered with the evidence of premeditation, painting a clear narrative. Regardless of her history, she had made a conscious choice, and that choice ended a life. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. The room was tense, each hour stretching endlessly for the families waiting outside. Finally, the verdict came: guilty of capital murder. The sentence was death, a decision that reflected both the severity of the crime and the meticulous planning behind it. As the gavel fell, some in the courtroom wept openly, while others sat in stunned silence. Brittany Marlowe Holberg remained composed, almost eerily so, as if the verdict had been expected all along. Outside the courthouse, reporters scrambled to capture reactions, the case immediately becoming a national story, not just for the shocking nature of the crime, but for the rarity of a woman facing the ultimate penalty in Texas. The trial left no doubts in the minds of the jurors or the public. This was a crime with far-reaching consequences, one that demanded justice. But for Holberg, the sentence was only the beginning of a long, arduous journey through appeals, legal maneuvering, and the harsh reality of life awaiting execution. Life on death row is a strange combination of routine and uncertainty, and for Brittany Marlowe Holberg, the passage of time is both measured and unpredictable. Though her sentence is death, she remains in a state of indefinite anticipation. Her execution date has not been officially set, leaving her in the unsettling limbo that defines life on Texas's death row. Each day carries the quiet tension of waiting. Guards note the subtle rhythms of her life, how she organizes her cell, meticulously follows routines, and keeps track of legal notices and appeals. The uncertainty itself becomes a psychological burden, a constant reminder of a fate looming somewhere in the future, though the timing remains unknown. Holberg has had numerous opportunities to challenge her conviction through appeals and petitions. Lawyers continue to file motions, review case files, and argue for procedural corrections or considerations of mental competency. These legal maneuvers are her only tether to hope, a slow-moving but vital process that extends the liminal space between sentence and potential execution. Visitors are rare but meaningful. Family and friends who maintain contact navigate the difficult balance of support and grief, witnessing a life suspended between punishment and the possibility of reprieve. Conversations are heavy with emotion, each word carrying the weight of years spent behind concrete walls and metal doors. Within the prison, the presence of other inmates awaiting execution is palpable. Holberg moves quietly through the space, aware of the shared tension and collective anxiety. Every sound, the clank of doors, the muted footsteps, the distant voices, reminds her and others of the narrow corridor that separates life from death. Psychologically, the indefinite nature of her situation is profound. Unlike a set execution date, the uncertainty prevents full closure, creating a persistent tension that can ebb and flow in waves of calm, anxiety, reflection, or resignation. It is a life lived in suspense, where the past, present, and future collide in a constant, relentless echo. Even without a confirmed date, the finality of her sentence shapes every aspect of her daily existence. Holberg's life on death row is a study in endurance, reflection, and the human capacity to survive under the weight of unending uncertainty. Every moment is a confrontation with the consequences of her actions, a slow, ongoing march toward an end that remains unseen but unavoidable.